Welcome back. In our last two lectures, we explored how an understanding and appreciation of poetic forms can help enhance our experience as both readers and writers. We discussed the powerful impact that the deliberate breaking of the rules of writing can have, and also the need to demonstrate an understanding of the rules before breaking them. An unusual turn of phrase, a deliberately provocative word choice, descriptive terms that take the reader by surprise. All of these can be powerful tools that give your writing more punch and draw your reader in. At the same time, we also discussed how too much of a good thing can be, well, too much. Piling on poetic devices, crafting sentence after sentence after sentence that tweaks the conventions of what we might call straightforward writing. All of this can signal to your audience that you're simply trying too hard, and it's more likely to turn your audience off rather than draw them in. Today, we're going to explore a genre that has great potential for this too much syndrome and the trying too hard situation. And this type of writing is dramatic writing. Drama arguably has the most potential for being an overdone genre simply by its nature. Drama, of course, is performance, and all the information we get in a dramatic production about characters, about situations, or plot points, all of this, it has to come out of the mouths of the actors on a stage. There's no description like, quote, "I don't know," Mr. Jones said, feeling quite perturbed. In a dramatic production, the character of Mr. Jones would simply have to say the line, "I don't know," and then he'd have to convey his perturbedness, if I can make up a word here. He'd have to convey that perturbedness in the way he delivers the line or the way he acts as he delivers it. Understanding the generic conventions of drama can help make us better readers and better writers, especially if we are writing something that's meant to be read aloud. Writing which is intended only, or maybe only primarily, to be read on the page can get away with some things that writing meant to be performed out loud cannot. A simple example will suffice here, and it's one that I think we're all familiar with. Just think of a tongue twister, like, "She sells seashells down by the seashore." There's really no problem if we read a line like this silently to ourselves in a book or a magazine, but if you ask an actor to perform this nightly on stage, then you're likely to get a screw-up here and there. And I'm sure all of us can think back to any number of newscasts you've seen on TV where the newscaster stumbles over a word or two. And sometimes this is just because the juxtaposition of certain words side by side don't look to be problematic when they're on the teleprompter, but these same combinations of words can end up being a real challenge when they're spoken aloud. I'm sure we've all heard newscasters say things like earthcake instead of earthquake, or maybe they pronounce the name of a foreign city which they've only ever seen on the page and never had to say aloud. I heard once the city of Prague, which is spelled Prague, I've heard it called Pragu on the air. And in a lecture series like this, I'm bound to make a few mistakes along these same lines. In my teaching company course on the medieval world, for example, I once tried to explain the medieval controversy over the dating of Easter. It's a really complex situation, and I was trying to make it clear, but as I was trying to be clear, I got confused, I got tripped up. I tried to explain what I had in my notes, I did a second take, I screwed that up, and finally I had to stop filming completely and write out, word for word, exactly what I was trying to say in 3 simple sentences, and then read it off the paper in my hand. Otherwise, everyone would have been just totally lost and confused. It was perfectly clear to me when I had jotted it down in my notes and I had thought about it, but when it came time to say it out loud, I just messed the whole thing up. So there's a difference between the spoken and the written word that we need to be conscious of. So today, we're going to talk about some of the points of dramatic convention And we're going to focus less on an explanation of what drama is and more on understanding how drama can make you be a better out-loud writer. All right, so let's start by considering wedding toasts. Many of us at one point or another get called on to make wedding toasts. And let's look at two wedding toasts side by side. Here's the first one. John and Jane, you guys are the best. I hope you have many long, happy years together. Congratulations. Okay, you might be saying, well, there's nothing wrong with that. It's clear, it's to the point. We understand that the bride and groom are being congratulated and people think they're wonderful. But now consider this toast. John and Jane, may the best day of your past be the worst day of your future. May your home always be too small to hold all of your friends, and may you live as long as you love and love as long as you live. Okay, so which toast would you prefer to receive at your wedding? I'm guessing that most of us would probably say the second toast. Why? Well, given everything we've discussed so far in this course about poetic devices, engaging writing, getting your reader or listener's attention, the second toast does a really beautiful job of making use of wordplay, parallel sentence structure, symmetry, creative use of images, and words appropriate to the occasion. With the phrases like, the best day of your past be the worst day of your future, and live as long as you love and love as long as you live. You've got some alliteration, you've got some rhythmic sentence patterning, you've got a beautiful juxtaposition of ideas, and then the line about, may your home always be too small to hold all of your friends. This creates an image of a house bursting with happy people. It's a really nice toast. Now I want you to consider, would there ever be a situation when you might prefer that first very simple, very unoriginal toast to the second very clever, very poetic one? Sure. And I will give you an example of what that situation might be. Listen to these two toasts again. John and Jane, you guys are the best. I hope you have many long, happy years together. Congratulations. Okay, that's toast one. Now listen to the second toast again. John and Jane, may the best day of your past be the worst day of your future. May your home always be too small to hold all of your friends, and may you live as long as you love and love as long as you live. Okay, so what's different here? The toasts still have the same words. There's the same simple sentiment in the first one, and the second has a more elegant, thoughtful, poetic sentiment. But I think all of us would probably want to pick the first toast as our choice in this situation. Why? There's one word: delivery. Even the most beautiful words ever written are going to suffer if they're delivered awkwardly, if they're mumbled, if they're read in a rush, if they're mispronounced. I mean, you get the picture. A beautiful piece of text is made ugly when the person who is speaking does not take the care to read the piece well. In fact, the award-winning writer Sherman Alexie, and some of you may have read his work, he's won lots of prizes, he's become very famous lately, and he's from my hometown of Seattle, so we're very proud to claim him. When asked what advice he has for young writers, Sherman Alexie often tells them to take a drama class or some acting lessons. And this is because good writers are very often asked to read their work aloud, and sometimes they have to take questions. If they aren't at least halfway decent performers, then the audience is going to be somewhat bored, no matter how much they might actually love the written works of the author. And I can tell you, having seen Alexie in person, it definitely paid off in his case. In person, that man, he can tell a story, he can make you laugh, he can bring you to tears almost more effectively than his written works do. He is much more entertaining than any stand-up comedian I've ever seen, and the way he presents himself makes me want to come up with all sorts of reasons to have dinner parties to which I could invite him, because he would be the life of the party and everyone would have a terrific time. So a consideration of drama can help us better understand a couple of aspects of words written to be performed aloud. What the words say and how those words are said. These two things work together, and you really cannot separate them. The most wonderful performance by an actor is not going to save clumsy writing, and the most moving monologue loses all of its force if it's not spoken convincingly. Now, a lot of you may be thinking right now, well, I really don't need to express myself with the spoken word all that often, so it's not a big deal whether or not I practice or I think about this. But at some point in your life, you're going to have to do something that counts as dramatic in the sense that we're talking about here. It could be a presentation at work. It could be defending yourself in traffic court. Or it could be proposing to your significant other. Each of these situations will go far more smoothly if you keep some basic rules of dramatic performance in mind. Keeping these issues in mind will also help if you are trying to engage with the dramatic performance, analyze and understand it, and then write about it. But unless you're analyzing an actual performance of a play, writing about drama can be a little tricky. Very often in a case like this, you might be asked to form an argument based on a reading of the text version of a play. And there could be multiple possible interpretations as to how you should play a particular scene or deliver a particular line. There are, then, as you might imagine, advantages to reading drama in text form on the page. The advantages here are you can go back, you can reread, you can rethink, you can move at your own pace. The disadvantages of engaging with a play only on the page are that you lose nuances that get conveyed by the staging, by the tone, delivery, the facial expressions, and the gestures of the actors. Let's take an example of a famous speech from Shakespeare and talk about things that we should consider if we're trying to engage with this moment, and then lessons we can learn from trying to understand the important aspects of this scene. I've picked a pretty famous speech. It's what's known as the St. Crispin's Day speech, and it's from Shakespeare's play Henry V. It's one of the more famous speeches in Shakespeare, and it serves as a good example for our purposes today because this is a speech in which the king, Henry V, is trying to persuade, he's trying to encourage, he's trying to make an argument. And most likely, if you are ever called on to do any public speaking, you also will be trying to persuade someone of something, to get them to agree that your analysis of sales figures from last quarter is really astute, that you should have a traffic ticket stricken from your record, that the woman you're asking to marry you should say yes. Okay, first, some very quick background for those of you whose Shakespeare or whose history is just a little bit rusty. In the year 1415, King Henry V of England crossed the English Channel to press his claim to the French throne. For reasons that are far too complex to go into here, but which I find fascinating and would be delighted to speak about at great length at a later time, he had with him only a small band of warriors. Some estimates place the size of the French army at around 36,000. Some people say it's as high as 50,000. And the English are somewhere around 6,000, maybe 8,000. Okay, so whatever the exact numbers, the English were vastly outnumbered, and that's the important thing here. And just before the battle, King Henry V gave his men a speech of encouragement to try and compensate for the overwhelming odds against them. Now, whatever it was that the real King Henry actually said, Shakespeare, I'm sure, vastly improved it when he wrote the St. Crispin's Day speech and then he put it into the character Henry's mouth. The speech is called this because the Battle of Agincourt, at which this supposedly occurred, was fought on the feast day of St. Crispin. And if anyone really cares, that's October 25th, and again, the year's 1415. Now, just before the speech begins, the king's cousin, Westmoreland, laments that there are so few of them here on the battlefield, and he expresses a desire for some of those men who chose to stay in England to join them in battle. Okay, and here is the king's response. What's he that wishes so? My cousin Westmoreland? No, my fair cousin. If we are marked to die, we are enough to do our country loss. And if to live, the fewer men, the greater share of honor. God's will, I pray thee, wish not one man more. Okay, so how does he begin? Well, first off, he acknowledges the situation. He makes a concession, as we've talked about in earlier lectures. He acknowledges the situation, but then he chides his cousin, gently, for expressing concern about their numbers. And then he goes on to tell those who are assembled that they are a large company, large enough that if they were to die, their loss would be felt throughout England. But then the king makes a slight shift, and he also acknowledges that there are relatively few of them, but he then characterizes this as a bonus. He says, the fewer men, the greater share of honor. In other words, there's going to be more honor to go around. He then continues his speech by appealing to the desire for honor that all his men presumably share. In the next lines, he expresses a lack of concern with the treasures and the spoils of war. And he indicates also that should he die and be stripped of clothes and arms and goods, it will not matter as long as he has his honor. He says, By Jove, I am not covetous for gold, nor care I who doth feed upon my cost. It yearns me not if men my garments wear, such outward things dwell not in my desires. But if it be a sin to covet honor, I am the most offending soul alive. No, faith, my coz, wish not a man from England. God's peace, I would not lose so great an honor as one man more, methinks, would share from me, for the best hope I have. Oh, do not wish one more. Here the king has cleverly taken the idea of covetousness, and this is usually a bad thing, and he's totally turned it on its head. It's noble to covet honor, and so greatly does he covet honor, he's pleased with this small regiment who've accompanied him, as he's not going to have to share this honor with too many other people. So far the king has done a good job of characterizing a disadvantage as a great advantage. He then turns his attentions to those members of the host who may still be having doubts about the battle that they're about to fight. And he announces, Rather, proclaim it, Westmoreland, through my host, that he which hath no stomach to this fight, let him depart. His passport shall be made, and crowns for convoy put into his purse. We would not die in that man's company that fears his fellowship to die with us. In other words, if you don't want to fight, we don't want you with us. We'd rather have you leave, for it means more honor for us. And heck, we'll pay your way. We'll give you some cash so you can get out of here. So in one move, Henry, or Shakespeare speaking through Henry's mouth, has essentially made sure that everyone who fights with him is there willingly and not under duress. He then uses a series of emotionally laden images to further persuade his listeners. Talk about knowing your audience. He absolutely understands the values of men in this time, this place, this specific moment, and he appeals to all the values of men of his day and time. He tells his men, This day is called the Feast of Crispian. He that outlives this day and comes safe home will stand a tiptoe when this day is named, and rouse him at the name of Crispian. He that shall live this day and see old age will yearly, on the vigil, feast his neighbors and say, Tomorrow is Saint Crispian. Then will he strip his sleeve and show his scars and say, These wounds I had on Crispin's day. Old men forget, yet all shall be forgot, but he'll remember with advantages what feats he did that day. Now here, the king paints a picture of life after the battle, when the men are safely home and greeted as heroes. He characterizes the battle they're about to take part in as a glorious struggle that's going to confer honor upon those who participate, and says that even in their old age, when they've forgotten everything else, the men will remember the feats they did on St. Crispin's Day. He then takes this to the next level, suggesting that those who fought there will become household names throughout the realm. Noble as the cause may be, there is an understanding here of the basic human desire to be known, to be valued and recognized. He says, "Then shall our names, familiar in his mouth as household words, Harry the King, Bedford and Exeter, Warwick and Talbot, Salisbury and Gloucester, be in their flowing cups freshly remembered. This story shall the good man teach his son, and Crispin Crispian shall ne'er go by from this day to the ending of the world. But we in it shall be remembered." According to him, not only will those who fight beside him earn honor and nobility, but they will become something like the medieval version of superheroes or major celebrities, with their names on everyone's lips. The speech is a brilliant example of knowing your audience, turning a bad situation to your advantage, and persuading people of the rightness of your cause so that they back you eagerly and not reluctantly. And then Henry concludes with some of the most famous lines in all of literature, words that are majestic and powerful and poetic, and in one fell swoop, he ennobles all those who fight beside him. In other words, he says they are just as noble as he is. He goes so far as to call the men fighting with him his brothers, and he emphatically includes himself or names himself as their equal by using the words we and us repeatedly. He says, "We few, we happy few, we band of brothers. For he today that sheds his blood with me shall be my brother. Be he ne'er so vile, this day shall gentle his condition. And gentlemen in England now abed shall think themselves accursed they were not here, and hold their manhoods cheap, whiles any speaks that fought with us upon St. Crispin's Day." It is a truly great, moving speech, and it brings the men to whom the king speaks in the play, the characters who are going to fight beside him, it brings them to their feet in a fervor of allegiance and willingness to fight for their lord. Likewise, it instills in the audience watching the play a sympathy and an admiration for Henry V. I mean, man, do you want him to beat those French after this speech? And the touching line in which he calls their company, "we happy few," causes a lump to rise in the throat if it's spoken correctly. They're the underdog, loyal to one another, fighting against the big, bad enemy for a noble cause. Now, you probably have noticed that I am obviously not at all a trained actor, but I think I did some justice to those lines. But what if the actor playing Henry V finished his speech, "We few, we happy few, we band of brothers, for he today that sheds his blood with me shall be my brother, be he ne'er so vile, this day shall gentle his condition, and gentlemen in England now abed shall think themselves accursed they were not here, and hold their manhoods cheap, whiles any speaks that fought with us upon St. Crispin's Day." It does not matter how glorious Shakespeare's words are if they are spoken as if they are being read off the back of a gardening catalog. No one is rushing off to fight the French if the king is trying to persuade them like this. Okay, so what do we take away from this and the other dramatic examples we've discussed today? Well, it seems clear that when it comes to words meant to be read aloud, presentation style is key. Remember, I used that word earlier in this lecture, delivery. Words read aloud need inflection, they need emphasis, and a certain degree of enthusiasm for them to be effective at all. And here, perhaps more than with any other kind of writing, I think you really need to prepare in advance if you're going to be speaking or reading aloud. In other words, it's a really good idea to practice what you're going to say before you get in front of a microphone and try to say it. I know any number of people who think, oh, I'm not going to worry about it, and I'm sure something will come to me when I get up there and I have to talk. And you can always tell who those people are because they are completely unprepared for whatever it is they're about to try to say. Whether it's an office presentation or a political speech, walking through it at least once out loud will help you do a much better job than you would otherwise. And at the same time, the reading it aloud, practicing it aloud, this can also alert you to any moments where the phrasing's really awkward, or if a sentence is really long and you're going to run out of breath if you try and read it aloud, or if a sentence looks fine on paper and it just doesn't come across clearly when you speak it. Reading it might be fine, spoken, it might be a complete mess. On a related matter, whether we're engaging a dramatic piece that's already written or we're getting ready to read some writing of our own aloud, it's also a good idea to remember that the words themselves are only half the story. How the actor's saying the lines smiles, frowns, gestures, or walks, all of these contribute to our understanding and interpretation of the words that are being spoken. My colleague Charlie Ross, who works on drama, says that, for example, the representation of the relationship between the characters of Iago and Othello in Shakespeare's play, also called Othello, the relationship between these characters can be dramatically different, not from just staging to staging, run to run, but performance to performance, so from one night to the next, just on the basis of how the character of Iago looks at Othello at just one key moment. The look itself is nowhere in the script. It's completely a choice of the actor and director, and how they decide to play that scene can change the whole play. The same goes for you if you're saying something in public. If you are wishing the happy couple every happiness in the world but frowning as you do so, people are going to wonder what you're unhappy about, and they're not going to believe that your feelings and your statements match up. What else? Well, as always, know your audience. King Henry V certainly knew his, and he was able to appeal to all their ideals and values. Make sure you're not talking down to or over your audience, and try to be appropriate. I have seen more than one groomsman at a wedding try to be witty by making some kind of dirty joke with his toast. And let me tell you, this does not usually go over very well in a room that's filled with elderly relatives of the bride and groom. Trust me on this. So, in the exercises attached to today's lecture, I really want you to be focusing on how you could do the same kind of dialogue in different moods. So how you could have a scene and how it might be written or performed so that the mood that comes across is happy or angry or bored. And so I want you to play with that a little bit so you can get the idea of how the same words can convey very different feelings depending on how it's performed. But perhaps the most important thing from today's lecture is to understand the need to really be sincere, to be convincing. And in order to do this, you're going to need to draw on personal experiences and feelings that you've had in the past to try and capture the attention and goodwill of your audience. In our next lecture, we're going to talk more about autobiography, which is a special category of writing filled with its own unique pleasures and pitfalls.